Andy Fine, welcome to Paper Napkin Wisdom. I'm excited to have our conversation today.
Thanks for having me on the show, Govin. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to chatting.
Yeah, me too. Well, you shared a really interesting paper napkin, and I want to read it out loud. And I think it's really important. 95% perfect takes 50% of the work. Doubling your effort isn't worth the last 5%. Why did you share that with me?
Sure, yeah. And it's a rule that has grown on me over the years and I think is fundamental to how I operate as a founder and entrepreneur. Um, it's especially important to small businesses and entrepreneurs who are running small teams, have to get a lot done in short periods of time and balance priorities. And what I've realized, and it's literally what the napkin says, is when you're doing a project or initiative, whether it's designing a landing page, or building out a blog post or anything in between, getting something perfect, right? A lot of us are perfectionists, especially entrepreneurs. Being a perfectionist is a dangerous game because it equates to large amounts of time and little amounts of output. A good example would be a landing page that I'm building. Let's say I could spend hours and hours and hours, even multiple days working on it to get it perfect. What I've come to realize is that you can get something about what I call 95% as good as it possibly can be, and about that 50% effort mark. And when I get it to that point, I realize, okay, do I want to double my effort to inch out or eke out another small amount of benefit, or do I want to move on to the next thing and get more things done in the same amount of time? And I realized that makes a big difference for increasing your output. If you don't focus on 100% perfection, you focus on getting it close, but not all the way there, especially in the early stages of running a business.
Yeah, and it's a really important lesson. And I think it's also really important that people hear that, that grew on you over the years, right? You didn't start off that way. It sounds like maybe you were committed to perfect to start out with.
It's hard not to be, right? Initially, when you're running, your first business, as I did years ago, I wanted everything to be perfect. It was my baby, right? I really wanted to make sure everything was done exactly the way I wanted it to be, exactly to my standards, exactly to my specifications. And you start to realize it's subconsciously, and then it starts to become more apparent the longer you're in the game, that really adds a lot of time. And in some cases, frustration too, right? If you have these high expectations, you're going to have to push significantly harder to get to them. And this isn't a way of saying like do things sloppy at all. We're still looking for a solid A here, right? 95% is a great score. But if you multiply that out over the course of a year, right? And of course, every task is going to have a different 95% and different effort levels. It might not always be 50%, but you can get roughly double the amount of things done in the same amount of effort by getting everything close to perfect, but not all the way there.
Yeah. And the other thing that it sort of strikes me is when you said perfect is a dangerous game. Like being perfect is a dangerous game. Isn't it also true that sometimes as entrepreneurs we think about what's perfect today with the information we have today, but then it gets out there and we get it. Let's say we do the whole 100%. We like sort of blow our minds out, go crazy, go to 100%, release what we think is perfect today. A customer comes in and blows the whole thing up, and it wasn't perfect anyway. Like it wasn't what we thought was perfect isn't perfect. Isn't that part of what you're saying also?
Yeah, you're exactly right. The Sartoro website looks nothing like it did when we started, right? You're constantly evolving and iterating and taking your learnings and putting them back into your business or your work or your designs or your UI, your UX, whatever it is, your customer experience. And yeah, especially early on, if you're trying to get to perfect, you don't even know what that is, to your point. And so it's a fruitless endeavor to try to get there when you don't know. You're better out giving it a great shot getting it out to the world. I think Tesla and SpaceX do this to a T, right? How many rockets have they blown up? They're not worried about getting it 100% perfect. They get it pretty darn close. They get it out there, they learn, and they're able to iterate much faster than historically we've seen. And it's the same for entrepreneurs at any level.
And doesn't that also like, so this idea also is about your perception, isn't it? Because it sounds like one of the things that you're saying, and you're talking about Sartoro's website, which is your business. When we talk about your website, don't you mean also that 95% and then iterating requires that you realize that you don't know everything and you're waiting for the feedback and you're waiting to learn? It puts you in the right mindset too, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It gets you in the right mindset, understanding that you don't know everything and understanding that it's okay to not be perfect, right? That's a hard thing early on because you're proud of what you're doing. You want everybody else to be impressed by you, whether you say it publicly or not. Um, and you're worried about making sure you're putting your best version of everything out there, and that can make things a lot harder, a lot slower, and a lot of times a lot more costly too, which are the enemies of entrepreneurship.
Right. And scaling, you also talked about this too, was the, starting off, you wanted everything done exactly to your standards, right? Which is a lot of control, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of need to sort of police everybody. And that kind of control is not scalable.
Yeah, absolutely not. And by the time I've got to Sartoro, I had learned my lesson. This was more on my first business that I had started, but you can never scale if you have that mindset because you end up having to do everything yourself. You're not necessarily getting better outcomes, you're just getting your outcomes, right? So you have to be able to let go. And part of that letting go is letting go of the idea of not just 100% objective perfection, but 100% of the perfection that exists in your mind, because you're the way you see things is always going to be to some degree different from how anyone else sees it, whether that's your co-founder, your employee, your assistant, your marketing team, whoever. And constantly being in this battle of making everyone else match what's in your head, you're going to drive yourself crazy.
Yeah, right. And and in your case, you know, so you had one business, you say you learned from that business before starting Sartoro. Now, you had some interesting things go on when you started Sartoro, kind of by accident, and you needed to sort of lean into this mantra a little bit to build the business, didn't you? So tell me about that story. Like you found yourself in Vietnam, where you still are under some
Yeah.
unusual circumstances.
Yeah, I came out to Vietnam in February of 2020 to set up manufacturing for Sartoro. It was originally intended to be a month and a half trip to get it all done, go back to New York City. 2 weeks after I was here, they shut the borders. Borders to the country got shut. I was already in. Long story short, I ended up getting put in forced quarantine with about 30 other foreigners because there was a positive case in our hotel, and the COVID restrictions there were quite intense. People thought it was bad in the US. It was on another level here. And I missed my flight back to the US while in this mandatory quarantine. By the time I had gotten out, Vietnam had essentially isolated and shut out COVID. The US, as we all know, what happened over there, especially in New York City, and ended up just staying. But it actually gave me an opportunity, kind of a rare one, in that as I was building out Sartoro over the next year, because we sell custom suits, which is probably the last thing anyone would buy during a pandemic, we weren't focused on sales. We weren't focused as much on this rapid development. So it was a little bit unique, kind of playing the other side of the coin, that we were just focused on building a foundation, getting everything set up, not worrying about numbers because the numbers weren't going to happen no matter what we did until COVID was over. So it was quite different.
Yeah, that is really different. So how did that impact your planning? Again, I think it's all 2020. It's all hindsight, right? But how did it impact your planning to be able to set that up at the 95% level, but get much more done in that setup period than you probably could have otherwise, right?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's tough because I was learning along the way as I was doing all of this too. I was in a foreign country with primarily a language that I don't speak, meeting a lot of new people, building a factory, which I hadn't been a part of before, working through all those nuances. But it was nice just being able to focus on that and not worrying about sales and marketing because there is so much that goes into all sides of the business. And I was really fortunate that I was able to it was kind of like silver lining to the whole thing for me. I was able to really focus on just getting everything set up so that when we were able to start selling, when people started going out into the world again, we were ready and we had built this solid foundation. So it's kind of counter to the 95% rule, but it was forced. Normally, that's not good. I never would have approached it in the same way. And I think it's not necessarily the right way to do it, but it was kind of forced in this case. It was quite unique circumstances that I think all
Yeah.
of us were going through.
Yeah, and I think that also the path was uncertain. So what was perfect wasn't possible, right? Perfect would have been, hey, we're gonna beta test this product, we're gonna get it out there, and people are gonna tell us what they think. But you didn't have that option. So you had to find another option that was completely not perfect also, but you were flexible, right? Does that make
Yeah,
sense? So
yeah,
this
and perfect.
95% rule also allows you to be flexible because the path isn't certain. You don't know what's going to happen next, right?
You have to be flexible. You have to be able to adapt, and you have to be able to let go of what you think perfection is as well, right? Because no one knows what it is, and you learn so much too. I've improved my design skills, my manufacturing skills across a number of areas far more than when I started. I know so much more now than when I started. So even attempting to like do the things we're doing today back then just wouldn't be feasible. So it's kind of again, it's not a good use of your time to strive for something that's not attainable. You have to build to it incrementally over time in an iterative process.
Did you ever think that, and again, perfect would have been that there was a market out there right away for your, I mean, you're bespoke for people who don't understand it. There's custom suits, right? These are custom suits and shirts, formal wear for men that you make available when everybody's wearing hoodies and tracksuits, right? I mean, tracksuits were out of stock, not suits. Everybody could buy suits anywhere at that
Yeah.
time. So, so was there ever a doubt in your mind that people would want what you have to offer during that period of time?
I mean, and when COVID ultimately ended,
No, no, when it was happening, like in the middle of it all, you're a year into COVID, you're in Vietnam, you're still stuck there, by choice or otherwise, but you're there unexpectedly. You're building this custom suit company, and you're wondering what's the market going to look like on the other side of that?
yeah, that's always in the back of your head. I think a couple of things were in my favor. I think I was fortunate to have done a good job of saving and investing over the previous 8 to 10 years. So I wasn't in immediate need where we had to start making revenue next month or I was, heading back to sleep in the basement. So that helped me a lot. It helped that the cost of living over here is quite affordable as well. So my burn rate was drastically reduced during this period too, which allowed us to extend our timeline. Um, I did some research and reading and looking at past instances of things like that, and the one notable one was the Great Depression, and the 1920s, and when we came out of that, formal wear came back into fashion when people could start going outside again. And I think I was kind of excited about that. And we did see that surge when COVID ended. People wanted to get out of their sweatpants and get out of their pajamas and dress up and look sharp. And it kind of maybe created a little bit of a shift, which we're still on both sides of the coin there. I think a lot of people have gotten used to wearing sweatpants and pajamas all the time, and some people do, are enjoy getting out and dressing up again.
Yeah, and I think that's even gone on the bespoke side. It's even gone bigger because if you look at especially men's fashion, do you think it was predictable that it was going to get so flamboyant? Like, I mean, previous to COVID, you didn't see a lot of pro sports players and athletes and other things dressing up in colorful, very highly custom outfits. But post COVID, it's custom everything and wild colors, wild combinations, very personal designs. This is right up your lane. Like like that actually came out. You talked about the 20s, the roaring 20s. It's kind of flapper era clothing again, right? I mean, it's out there.
Yeah, styles come in waves, and I think we've seen a change, maybe possibly in part because of COVID, people's willingness to express themselves in different and unique ways and do things that are a bit outside of the norm, outside of the standard. You're seeing less, classic dark blue or charcoal suits, and you're seeing people opt for more. And this is still a conservative lighter blue, but it's still different from your typical navy. Yeah, and you're seeing people experiment with different colors, different styles, having a bit more fun with it, and reviving it in a bit of a way that allows them to look good and still express their personal style.
Yeah, I love it. So what do you let's talk about the feedback loop on iteration, right? So you take your product out there, you're committed to this 95% rule, you're presumably teaching your team this, right? So you don't you want everybody sort of singing from the same hymn book on this, right? So you're teaching your team this. How do you maintain the feedback loop given that your market is probably mostly international and you're in Vietnam, right?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, you do it in a number of ways. There's not one clear-cut answer. You're looking at heat maps, how people are using your website, how they're going through the flow and the buying process. You're interviewing customers, you're having consultations with them. We offer suit consultations, and they're doubly valuable for us because one, it's a great service for customers who want to get that extra assistance, but every one of those calls is also a great learning opportunity for us to see what they're asking, what's confusing, what isn't clear to them, and just being diligent about tracking as much as you can, even when it doesn't seem like there's a point in doing it because you're doing smaller volumes. But we can tell a lot from what questions we get asked. We get people asking often, how quickly do you deliver these? When am I going to get it? It's plastered all over the website, the answer, right? But we still get asked it. And so it's telling us, hey, even though we thought that this was pretty clear, it's not. And
Mhm.
so let's go back and see how we can make this more apparent in the buying journey so it's not something that's holding them back and they're wondering about. People asking, how do I know this is going to fit? How can we better address that? How can we better clear that fear up and reduce that worry from them? And what can we do to eliminate concerns or mitigate them as much as possible? And you only get better at that from learning and actually going out there and testing the market and testing the waters.
What's really interesting is, I believe that flexibility of behavior is the hallmark of leadership, right? When leaders can whisper in the language of their clients, they are more successful because that's more successful than screaming at them and shouting at them louder and hoping that they're going to get the message. And it sounds like you're very open to being flexible in how you communicate your message and learning out of great curiosity with your clients. Is that sort of like the hidden benefit of this too? Because if you burn yourself out going after 100% all the time, you don't have the juice to be curious, right? I mean, you have to be calm. You have to have the energy to get curious. If you're wiped out by delivering what you think is a perfect product, then isn't it also, like really upsetting when people don't love it right away, right? Like, I mean, you can get offended by that whole thing.
You can, depending on your mindset. I think you're hitting on a great point here and the flexibility side, and that goes as high level as your overall vision for your brand or your business, or what it's going to be and what it's going to evolve to. And you might have a North Star goal when you start for what your brand looks like, what's the ethos of it, what's the persona, what's your target market. As you dive into it, you might find you're completely wrong on that. And there might be a totally different market, or maybe not totally different. It could just be an adjacent market that's way better for your business, that's going to make you more successful, make you more scalable, and have a better chance of overall long-term success. And if you're so fixated on your brand only being exactly what's in your head, and you shut out the information and the feedback you're getting, and don't pay attention to that, you're never going to reach your full potential, because your vision at the beginning is never what it's going to be at the end.
How did that show up for you guys? Like, what was a lesson like that for you?
That's a good question. I think we've learned a lot of different things about what's important to customers. I think generally speaking, for us doing suits, we weren't coming out with a product that is like, it suits not something entirely unique, right? It's a product that exists. So what makes Sartoro unique, or our suits unique, is the experience, the buying experience, the shopping experience, the actual fit experience, right? Especially buying online. What's the biggest concern with clothing? Is it going to fit me? And it's even more so with a custom suit that has a lot of moving parts. It's not a flexible, stretchy t-shirt that any size could really fit somewhat. So there's a lot more parts that go into it. I think we didn't realize how big weddings would play in our business. We always thought it would be big, or a significant part. I think it's grown to be an even larger part than we had initially expected, and we're embracing that, right? There's no reason to shy away from it. I don't necessarily want to be a wedding only suits brand, but we're going to embrace what's working as well. And weddings and wedding parties seem to love us a lot. And we lean into that, and we work on ways how we can continue to serve them better. We're working on a custom app right now, a web app for the site that's going to allow grooms and their fiancés to come in and plan all the outfits for their wedding party, and make it incredibly easy for all the guys to come in and place their orders and do everything and just streamline that. And we weren't going to do that when we started the business. That came out of seeing that, hey, there's a real big chunk of the market here that we can leverage and grow on.
And and to me, your 95% rule allows you to embrace change, allows you to create that mindset where you're open to that brand perception, that adjacent. I love the way you talked about it, an adjacent market, because if you're so focused and you get the blinkers on that this is where I'm going to go, you miss this opportunity that's over here that could be lucrative. And they love you over here. They want you. They desperately want you, but you're just not hearing it. So
Yep.
you're saying that this keeps you in the mindset, especially as you approach all parts of your business this way, that you can pick up the clues that exist around you that otherwise you might not see, right?
Yeah, you need to pick up the clues. It is a double-edged sword too, right? Because as Steve Jobs made famous, right? It's almost, your success is almost, not directly, but pretty close to it, correlated to how many things you say no to as well. So to some
Mhm.
degree, you also have to look at opportunities and not take them, right? So it's this balance of being open and being flexible and being willing to embrace change and things that are different from your vision, but also not jumping at every opportunity that passes and like half-assing it through, right? So it's committed, it's also tied to how much effort you're going to put into things and prioritizing which ones you're going to work on with the amount of resources that you have at your disposal.
Yeah, because you're also talking about being a solid A. You're not talking about 50% being in it, like half-assing your way into this one and half-assing your way into that. You're talking about delivering greatness, not perfection, but being great at this and not just sloughing it off and saying, ah, whatever, I'll just do whatever, right? Like you're talking about solid A, being great at it, but being open-minded and energetic enough that you can see the adjacent opportunities.
Yeah, you have in almost any type of business today, you have to be great to succeed. And it's far easier to be great at one thing than to try to, or it's way more beneficial to be great at one thing than to be good at a lot of things. But I think where the rule comes in as well is that within being great at one thing, there are many sub things, sub projects, and sub tasks within those projects that make up that one thing. And being able to efficiently navigate your way around all of those projects and prioritize your time and be efficient with your time and with your output requires that balance of effort, that balance of limited perfection, right?
That's amazing. Andy, thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Govin. I really appreciate it.
There is one more thing though. We do end every episode with a shout out. And it's based on this idea is what you appreciate appreciates what positive energy you put out there in the world creates more positive energy. So with that, is there anybody that you'd like to shout out to close our episode today?
Yeah, I think I'd be hard pressed not to give a shout out to my parents, my mom and dad. I think one of the reasons that I've traveled down this path of entrepreneurship, which is can seem like a crazy idea when you're getting started, and it to some degree it is not having pushback from them, but having support. I worked in banking when I got out of college. I was working at Goldman Sachs, had a pretty good job, could have coasted through that to a very comfortable life. Um, and I left that behind to pursue my dreams and my passions and my interests and to try new things and get out there and experience the world. And I'm living in Vietnam, right? I wouldn't be doing that if I was working in banking at Goldman still. And their support along the way and saying, yeah, if you believe in that, yeah, quit your job, go give it a shot, go for it. What's the worst that could happen? That support has meant a lot to me over the years, and it's a big part of why I'm here today. So I'm very appreciative of them and what they've done for me.
That's great. That's great. Thanks, Andy.
Thank you.